So, hey guys, we're back with another podcast interview. And this man that we're going to be talking to, you may not have ever heard of before. He's not a writer. He doesn't write movies. He doesn't write novels. I don't know if he writes magazine articles, but we'll find out. But he brings Western history to folks in a different way, and he's got a fabulous story, and I can't wait to bring it to you. But before we do so, we got some folks that we want to thank. And the first one is the folks over at the Tombstone Epitaph, Arizona's longest running newspaper. You can subscribe. I urge everybody to do this 3-year for $60, because if you go year to year to year, it's going to cost you $75 for 3 years. But if you do the 3-year up front, it's $60, and that saves you $15. And Mark and Eric, they're doing a phenomenal job of bringing Western, Old West history in a newspaper format delivered right to your door, and that is at the Tombstone Epitaph. So if you want to subscribe, go over to the tombstoneepitaph.com. I also want to thank my friends at the Wild West History Association, which I'm a member of, and I believe, are you a member of, yes or no?
Yes, okay. Absolutely.
There you go, because I tell everybody if the answer is no, we're hanging up. So the Wild West History Association, we just had a roundup at Rapid City, South Dakota, and oh my God, we went everywhere. And 2023 roundup is going to be in San Antonio, Texas, and we're going to be touring the Alamo and talking all about Western history in Texas. Now, if you want to join, you go to wildwesthistory.org. It's $75 a year, but out of that $75, you get the journal, and the journal is a book. It's truly a book, a 100-plus page book of Western history with true provenance, pictures. It's deep research, and you're going to love it. So check out the folks and join at wildwesthistory.org. Now, if you want even more history and you're a social media junkie like I am, check out the Wild West History Association's YouTube page. They've got so much video. I think they're just coming out with videos all the time. And Pam and who else is over there? Eddie. They're putting videos together, and they're getting Wild West history in a video format. Of course, you can also find them if you're an Instagrammer like I am at the Wild West History Association page on Instagram, and it's all pictures with content. And give them a follow, because, man, you're going to love what you get. Make sure that you check them out and you engage in the group, because they're just, Western history is everywhere. Of course, you can find my podcasts and interviews on here on wherever you're listening. If you're on the iHeartRadio app, or if you're on iTunes or Spotify, but you can also find me on Facebook at Cochise County _travels. You can find me on Instagram at Cochise County _travels, and yes, on YouTube at Cochise County _travels. So if you're looking for Western history, if you do all of those things, there is not enough time in the day to absorb it all, but man, you'll learn a lot. So the gentleman we have on the phone today is somebody that I didn't really know much about, and he reached out to me and he said, "Hey Mike, I'm David," or Dave, now we're just Dave, and he said, "I run the Wild West History Association Instagram page. Can you help promote?" I said, "Yeah, man, I'll help you promote." I says, "I'll give you some shout outs," which I just did. And I followed the page, and it's fantastic. What happened though is we formed a relationship, formed a friendship, because the more we spoke and the more we spoke and the more we spoke, we realized we have a lot in common. And he's just a good guy. And today we're talking to David Guyton. And David Guyton is a reenactor, but he brings Western history along with his group called Aces and Eights. So if you go on Facebook and look up Aces and Eights, now, if you type in the word Aces and Eights, you're going to be, oh my God, there's so many groups that you're going to have to work through, from bands to bars and, oh my gosh, and public group and private group. So you want to look for Aces and Eights, and it's a private group. And if you're unsure about what to do or how to get a hold of them, you can send me a message through my Facebook or Instagram page at Cochise County Travels, and I will hook you up, and I'll send you a picture, and I'll link you up to the group. It's real easy to do. So David, like I said, is a reenactor, but he's got an amazing story. So welcome, sir.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Glad to be here. I'm glad you're here. So you have a really cool story on how you got into Western history, but I want to talk first about you, where you're born and raised, and you're a police officer, retired, I believe.
Yep.
So thank you for your service. I'm a huge LEO supporter. That's law enforcement officer supporter. And tell us about you a little bit.
Well, so I'm from Marietta, Georgia, which is about 30 minutes north of Atlanta. If you go out of Atlanta, straight up I-75, you're going to run into Marietta. You got to go right through it. So I was born and raised there. Lived my whole life there except for the time that I spent in the military in Fayetteville, North Carolina, at Fort Bragg. I was in the 82nd Airborne for 6 years. And after that, I moved back to Georgia and I became a police officer. I worked for the Cobb County Police Department, which is Marietta is in Cobb County, and Cobb is the next county north of Fulton, which is, of course, where Atlanta is. So I did that for a little over 26 years.
Wow.
I retired in February of 2018, and when I retired, I moved to Asheville, North Carolina, which is in the western, on the western side of the state. And I've been here for about 4.5 years. So
he told me a funny story, which is he'd never been in an airplane before until and tell everybody, because that's kind of a funny story about how you'd never been in an airplane before.
So growing up, when my family would go on vacation, we drove everywhere. I mean, we never flew. We went around. We didn't go far. We go to Florida, whatever. But so I had never flown on an airplane at the time when I joined the Army. And so I ended up, after basic training, I went to jump school, which is where you learn to become a paratrooper. And so the first time I ever flew on an airplane, I jumped out of it. I didn't land in the plane. I jumped out of it. And in fact, the first 15 times I flew, I jumped. And it wasn't until my 16th flight, where the conditions on the drop zone were bad and the jump got scratched, and I actually landed in an airplane. Now I've since flown all over the world and I've landed a few times in the plane. So, but yeah, first time I flew, I jumped. So
that's kind of funny. I mean, we take flight for granted. I fly a lot for my job, but to think that somebody's never flown before until he went into an airplane to jump out of it, it's like, this sucks. I go up in the air and I jump out. I don't even get land. I don't even get peanuts and a soft drink. Now, this sucks.
I'll be honest with you. I was actually more excited about flying for the first time than I was to be jumping out of the plane, which was exciting as well. But I was just like, I can't believe I'm flying. So yeah, it's kind of a funny story, but I've flown all over the place since then. So yeah.
So you get out of the military, and you become a police officer.
Right.
And tell that, because a lot of men do come out of men and women come out of the military, and because of their training and I don't want to say the regiment, but the disciplines is a better word. The disciplines that you learn in the military, it really made you a very successful police officer.
Well, so yeah, when I got out of the Army in 1991, I moved back to Georgia, moved back home, and I had a young family. I was married. My daughter had been born while I was at Fort Bragg, while I was in the military. And when I got out, I mean, I needed a job. I didn't have anything lined up when I got out, and I had originally thought that at some point in time, when I got out of the military, I wanted to be a history teacher. I had actually considered that, becoming a teacher. But when I got out of the military, I needed a job and quickly. So I started applying to the different departments around the metro Atlanta area. And as it turns out, looking back on it, I'm glad that I got hired by the department that I did, because it's one of the finest in the country. Like I said, I spent 26 years there. I worked at all the different precincts. I worked in the gang unit. I was in crimes against children. I was a detective sergeant in the crimes against children unit that investigates all the crimes against the folks that can't help themselves. I spent years on the SWAT team, and I loved every minute of it. I absolutely loved every minute of it. And I knew pretty early in that this was what I wanted to do. I gave up the idea of being a teacher because I had found my calling in law enforcement, and I absolutely loved it. So.
Well, thank you for your service, man. We appreciate you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
So you moved to Asheville, North Carolina, and I've been to Asheville and Hendersonville, and man, it's a beautiful place in North Carolina.
Yep.
I think they got the Bat Cave and the tallest granite column with the elevator that goes up on the inside of that column to that lookout. But something caught your eye, and there was a big mansion out in the forest. And did you not become a security guard for that?
Yeah. So, Asheville, like I said, Asheville's in the western part of North Carolina, in the mountains, beautiful area.
Gorgeous.
In 1888, a fellow by the name of George Vanderbilt of the Vanderbilt, New York Vanderbilts, came down to Asheville with his mother, fell in love with it, and immediately started buying up property. He ended up at the height of the estate. It was 125,000 acres. And in 1889, he started construction on Biltmore House. And it is to this day the largest private home in the country. It's 175,000 square feet, 250 rooms, 4 acres of floor space. It's incredible. And it was built between 1889 and 1895. He actually opened the house to his family and friends on Christmas Eve, 1895. So this is during the Victorian era, obviously, which is my favorite time period in American history. And I the first 2.5 years I worked at Biltmore, I worked in the house in security, and just fell in love with the place. If you've never been there, it is absolutely, you can't fathom the size of this place and the beauty. It's incredible. And so I worked inside the house for the first 2.5 years and learned so much about the Victorian era. And it's been an educational experience for me.
But you're still there, correct?
Yeah, I am still there. I've been working for him for 4.5 years now. 2 years ago, I changed departments and I started working at their equestrian center. So it's a private boarding facility on Biltmore Estate, where if you have a horse, you can, feasibly you can bring your horse there and board the horse at this facility. So I've been working there for a couple of years. I actually had a couple horses growing up, and then I had a couple of more much later in life, up until about 14 years ago. And then I got out of the horse business. Mm-hmm. But I had some experience with them. So I went down and talked to the folks. They had some openings. I went down and talked to them. And a few weeks later, I switched. So I've been at the equestrian center for be 2 years in next month. So not quite 2 years, but almost.
Wow. Because I've been there. Yeah. I'm blown away at how beautiful. And correct me if I'm wrong. Is it in the Smoky Mountains area or the Appalachians?
It's in the Appalachian Mountains, but the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, the closest point to where I am is about a 45-minute drive. So we're right on the edge, right on the edge of the national park, and I go over there quite a bit, just kicking about over there. It's just such a beautiful area. You do a lot of camping over there.
But there's a lot of history there too. There's a lot of tunnels. There's a lot of, I follow a lady on TikTok and she goes all over showing the tunnels and the old rail lines and the bridges. There's a ton of history. So was that part of, or the beginning of where you really started digging into history, or was Wild West history always there?
I think it's always been there to some degree. So I'm 56 years old, and my generation was the last generation to be able to watch Westerns on television in prime time that were still in production. The two big ones were Gunsmoke and Bonanza.
Oh, I love Bonanza.
Yeah, and Bonanza aired through from 1959 to 1973. And Gunsmoke was on from 1955 to 1975. So as a kid growing up in the 70s, either one or the other was always on at my grandparents' house. And my parents watched them too, but I remember my grandfather loving both of them. And so I was always watching the Westerns. And on Saturday morning you get up and there'd be reruns of The Lone Ranger and The Rifleman and all those shows.
Yeah, the Rifleman's another one. Just love that one.
Yeah, great show. But then in the area where I grew up, Marietta, Georgia, is literally just covered with Civil War history. I mean, it's everywhere. Where I lived growing up, I was within 10, 15 minutes of several major battlefields and fights that took place as Sherman marched down to Atlanta and then eventually on down to Savannah when he made his march to the sea. He actually burnt down my hometown. But there's just so much Civil War history all around Marietta, Georgia, Kennesaw, Georgia, that area. And I became interested in that at a really young age. And I think probably that's where my love of history came from, was actually all the Civil War stuff that was around where I grew up. Kennesaw Mountain National Park or National Battlefield is part of the National Park Service. They have a great visitor center and a cool museum. And we would go there and there would always be some guys, Civil War reenactors, and that was huge back in the 70s and 80s in that area. But they would always have a little encampment set up, and they would explain to folks. They would, talk to them about the history of the Civil War and what it was like to be a soldier and be in these encampments, and they would explain just the daily lives of the soldiers. And I was totally fascinated with that. And then, like I said, always had an interest in history. And then that led much later, I grew up and, like I said, I went to school for a couple of years, joined the military, got out, became a police officer, had a family, got busy, like we all do. And so it just kind of sat on the back burner for a while. But then sometime around 2006, 2007, I was on the internet and I came across an organization called the Single Action Shooting Society, or SAS, where for people who don't know, it's a competitive shooting, but you dress up in cowboy clothes or period Western clothing. And so you have to dress up like a cowboy and you go and shoot. And I'm like, man, I'm a police officer. I love shooting. And so I said, this is fantastic. This is just so much fun. So I did that for a couple of years. And then 2009, I was doing something on the internet, and I came across this website for this Western Art Museum in Cartersville, Georgia. And, you know, if you're not familiar with the area, growing up, Cartersville, I don't want to sound disparaging, but it was kind of a podunk town. I mean, it was a really small town, it's a beautiful town, but there was nothing there. But it grew with the boom of the 90s and the 2000s, and it's a large town now. It's really large, but it's still beautiful. So I'm wondering, what kind of Western art museum can Cartersville, Georgia possibly have? So I decided to go up there one day, and when I get there, I'm absolutely blown away by this museum. It's unbelievable. 120,000 square feet, Smithsonian affiliated museum of Western art. It's primarily paintings and sculpture, though they do have some artifacts and they also photography stuff. So while I'm there, I find out that every October the Booth Museum puts on the Southeastern Cowboy Festival and Symposium. And so I thought, well, that sounds pretty interesting. I'm going to come back up here and see what that is. So the museum actually owns a couple of acres about a block away from the museum. It's a lot with nothing on it, some trees and stuff, but it's their festival grounds. And so I go back that October. This is October 2009. And I go back, and again, I'm blown away by this because there's chuck wagons. There's an Indian village set up, Native American dancers. They've got a Western town facade, all sorts of Western related arts and crafts, vendors selling, Western clothing and stuff. And I'm like, God, this is just awesome. And part of the entertainment that day was a reenactment of the gunfight at the OK Corral. And so I watched this, and when I see this, I'm like, that's what I want to do. That is what I want to do. That is so cool. So after it was over, I went down and I sought out Doc Holliday. The guy that played Doc Holliday is a guy named Brent Burton. And I told him, how much I enjoyed watching this. It's so cool. I asked him, do you guys ever need fill-ins? Are you ever looking for, to add people or whatever? He's like, yeah, actually, we need people all the time. I'm like, great, because I shoot in SAS, and which he did as well. So he knew right away. So I have the clothing, I have the guns. If you ever need anybody, please give me a call. And so he took my phone number, said, I'll call you next year. I was like, okay, sounds great. And I walked away really not expecting to hear back from him. But sure enough, about 6 weeks out, the following October, or it would be September 2010, I get a phone call from Brent. Hey, this is Brent. You still interested in doing this reenactment stuff at the Booth Museum? I'm like, absolutely. He's like, okay, well, I said, I don't know what part you're going to play just yet, but I'll get back with you a few days ahead of time and let you know. So that year, 2010, was my first year doing the reenactment stuff.
So let me ask you something before you continue on.
Yeah, sure.
You're doing all this stuff. You're just on the cusp of becoming a reenactor.
Yeah.
But you had seen reenactments in other places. I'm not going to give the towns, but you had seen them in other places. Some of them were like jokes and funny and not historically accurate and all that. And were you like, what is this? Well, this isn't true.
That actually came later. It after I had joined this group, it actually came later. And yet, but to answer the question, yes, I was kind of shocked by it. To be honest, I'm like, because we try to do what we were doing as accurately as possible.
Gotcha.
and the stuff that I was seeing, I was just like, holy cow, it's really not even close.
So so you get contacted by this guy.
Mm-hmm.
He says yes. Now, a reenactor can't go down to Kohl's or J.C. Penney's and I'm looking for reenactor clothes from 1880. Oh, come right over here. We have where does a person go? Where are there online forums? Are there stores you can go to? Like, how did you put your ensemble together, or did the group said, well, this is kind of what we need you to play, or did they just say, listen, this is the requirement and this is what you need to do? Like, how did the process go about? Because personally, I'm fascinated by that.
Well, so like I said, I started shooting with the Single Action Shooting Society, and of course you have to have the clothing. And on their website at the time, they had some sponsors, and so that's where I started. I saw the ads on their website to these online stores, and there's a few of them. Wild West Mercantile is one. River Junction Trade Company is one that I've used. Historical Emporium is another one. So that's how I got started. But I kind of, I wanted it to be accurate. So I started doing I started looking for books to try and do a little bit of research before I dropped all this money on these clothes. And there were several good books out at the time. One of them was called The Look of the Old West. There's another one called I See by Your Outfit. And these go into depth about the clothing of the Victorian era, specifically cowboy stuff. And there's several others that were out there. So I get these books and I read through them and I start buying stuff. And I started shopping. I used Wild West Mercantile and River Junction Trade Company primarily early on. And a lot of their stuff is it's like you said, you can't just find this stuff anywhere. It's hard, and you really got to dig for it. But that's how I got started. And I'll tell you another good resource that I found later were the Sears and Roebuck catalog and the Montgomery Ward catalog from that time period. I mean, that is exactly where people were, that's where they're buying their stuff from. If there's no store in town, they're ordering it from these catalogs, and you're looking at exactly what it was they would have been wearing. It's fascinating. Those two catalogs are absolutely a treasure trove of history. So I've used those to look at stuff that that I might want to buy. And then there's now on Facebook, there's a really good Facebook page, and it's called Who Wore What in the American West. And you can get any question you have about that era and the clothing that was worn. You can find an answer on that page, because the folks that run that page are phenomenal. It's a great resource to use if you're looking to get into this sort of thing.
So if you're wondering who we're speaking to, we're on the phone with David Guyton. He is a member of Aces and Eights, and I do have an email. Is it acesandEightshistory@gmail.com?
That's it. Yep.
Yeah. So if you want how to get to the Facebook page or learn more about their group for reenacting, or maybe even if you're in the area around it and you're thinking about wanting to have a reenactor group come to your area, or if you have questions, you can get a hold of them at Aces and Eights. It's all spelled out, not numbers. Aces and Eights history@gmail.com.
Right.
When the many times that you and I have spoken, we spoke about the fact that your group, unlike some reenactors, and there's probably big reenactors groups out there doing wonderful work, but your group specializes in a time period, and isn't it like a time period of like the 1870s to the 1900s. So you're in a 30-year period, correct?
Right. Yeah. We're pretty much like you said, 1870 to 1900. We do some stuff that takes place in 1898 in Skagway, Alaska, involving a guy named Sophie Smith. He was probably the most prolific con artist of the Old West, and he just happened to be from Newnan, Georgia, which is just over from Griffin, Georgia, where Doc Holliday was from. So, but this guy Sophie Smith was from Georgia and went out west and became this. He had a whole group of guys that he traveled around with, scamming people out of their money. And we do the killing of Sophie Smith as one of our reenactments.
Well, if you go on Facebook, incidentally, there's a Sophie Smith page ran by a friend of mine, Jeff Smith, who lives.
Jeff's a great guy.
Yeah, he lives up in Williams, Arizona. Or northern Arizona. He's not exactly in Williams, but great guy, Jeff Smith, and he's part of Sophie Smith family. He's a descendant of. Mm-hmm. But you said something when we were talking about the authenticity of your group, which is your group will research the gunfight based upon court transcripts and transcripts and eyewitness accounts. Tell us about that process of how your group puts together a reenactment based upon true facts.
Well, so going back a few years, there's a founding member of this particular group, a guy named Robert Terry, and Robert and I were in the same reenactment group at the Booth Museum. Our first year, my first year was his first year, and so I've known him since 2010. But probably 5 or 6 years ago, he and I started talking about adding some living history to the reenactment stuff, and by that I mean doing what the Native Americans were doing, where they had set up a small village. I mean, they've got teepees. It's just incredible. I can't describe it. The amount of stuff that they bring to this festival. And we thought, well, we need to do something like that. So he and I were talking about it. Fast forward, I ended up moving to North Carolina when I retired, and I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to keep doing it, doing the reenactments. But in 2019, Robert and another guy from the group split off and formed Aces and Eights. And so true to what he and I had discussed, a few years prior to that, they started incorporating living history into not only doing the reenactments, but doing the living history. But as far as the reenactment goes, of the gunfight at the OK Corral, we did the research, using the most reliable sources that we could find, eyewitness testimony, testimony of the actual participants as it was documented, courtroom testimony, to try and put together what we think is probably the most accurate version that you're going to see. Now, of course, in 1881, there was no CSI. There's no crime scene investigation. Whereas today you would document every aspect of something like that. You would know where every bullet came from, every gun that they would match up everything. And there was nothing like that back then. So, they don't even know what guns were actually used in the gunfight. But, there's all sorts of speculation, but I don't think there's anyone that really knows for sure, other than that Doc Holliday had the shotgun and the nickel-plated revolver. But like I said, based on all those things, we have tried to come up with a gunfight that is as historically accurate as we can possibly put together. We know, there were certain shots that we knew certain people took and hit certain people, but some of the other stuff, there's always was Tom McClowry armed? Did he have a gun? So we take all that into consideration. And I think, you would be hard pressed, I think, to find another group that does a more accurate version of that particular gunfight. Now, we do have to make some concessions for safety's sake and for the sake of the audience, both for the members of the group who are doing the shooting and the folks in the audience. We have to maintain some distance, as the lot that this gunfight took place on between the Fly's boarding house and the Harwood house was about 18 feet wide. Well, we test all of our blanks that we use in these reenactments, and about the closest that we can stand to each other and shoot at one another without receiving some type of injury is about 20 feet. So we're standing further apart than the lot was wide. I mean, when the fight started, they were about 6 feet from each other. So, and there's no way we can do that. And we have to be cognizant of the audience, and their safety. We can't be shooting toward the audience. You've got people on the ends that are closer to the group, closer to the folks who are watching. So we have to take all that into consideration. So it's not going to be quite as fluid as what probably took place, but taking that into consideration, it's still really accurate. So,
because your group not only does the reenactment, but they also have somebody, is that correct, reading? Like they're going to read the chain of events of what they're going to see?
Yeah, the way we do it, so we have a narrator that comes out to start talking to the crowd, and they explain, they give a little bit of the background history that leads of the events that lead up to the actual fight. Now, it's such people watch movies and they think, well, all this stuff happened in a period of, a few days, a few weeks. It actually took place, between 1879 and 1882 when Wyatt and his posse, along with Doc Holliday, when they fled Arizona. So it's spread out. So we can't, we're not trying to, we don't want to lose anybody by going over all of it, but we hit the highlights, of what led up to the fight. And then we run through it twice, each show. What we do is we do a slow motion version where the narrator explains shot by shot what's taking place, who's shooting at who,
that's cool.
What happens, and it takes a few minutes to go through it that way, and then we go back and we load up and we come back out and then we do it in real time, and within 30 seconds it's over. But people get to see it both in slow motion and then what it most likely actually looked like. So they get to see it twice, and it makes a little more sense it makes a little more sense to them when you do it in slow motion, and then they see it in full time, because otherwise, I mean, you're just, you're out there for basically a minute and it's over with. So we try to give them a little more.
How many gunfights or reenactments, and I'm not saying the gunfight on Fremont Street, but how many different, like you did the one for Sophie Smith, you're doing, for Sophie, you're doing the one for the OK Corral. How many different ones does your group do?
So it's a young group. Like I said, it was formed in 2019, and that was the first year that they did. So Griffin, Georgia, every September puts on a big festival called the Doc Holliday Festival. And of course, Doc Holliday was from Griffin, Georgia. And so we started being the primary entertainment the year the group was formed in 2019 at the Doc Holliday Festival. Of course, everything got canceled in 2020. And then we were there last year and then again this year. But so it's a young group, and we're still trying to put some stuff together. But we do the killing of Sophie Smith, which took place in July 8th, 1898 in Skagway, Alaska. And we're trying to keep some of it connected to the, because we're in Georgia, or the group is based out of Georgia. So we're trying to incorporate Georgia history or Southeastern history with some of this stuff. So there was another gunfight, the shootout on Gay Street that took place in Knoxville, Tennessee. I've not done that one. It's been done at a couple of shows that I was unable to participate in just because some of this stuff comes up last minute. And for me, I live the farthest away. Most of the folks are in North Georgia or right across the line in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Mm-hmm. But I'm way over here in Nashville. So sometimes if I don't get enough notice, it's a little hard for me to get to some of this stuff. But they've done that one. And we're working on a shootout that took place in Dothan, Alabama. It's called the Dothan Riots. We haven't got that one completed yet. So right now, our moneymaker is the street fight on Fremont or the gunfight at the OK Corral.
So people are watching the gunfight at the OK Corral.
Mm-hmm.
They're seeing this going on. It's right in front of their faces. They're probably lined up or sitting in chairs in a safe spot that you've deemed a safe spot.
Mm-hmm.
The gunfight is over and you're mingling with the crowd. You get a lot of people that come up and say, that's not how it went down at all.
Honestly, I've never had anybody critique it like that. They're all, it's well received. I've never had anybody come up and say, well, that didn't happen or that was not right or, and again, a lot of this stuff, 141 years later, there's still a debate going on about this gunfight and what happened and what actually happened. And we're probably never going to know the whole complete story. So you still got to this day, you've got two sides that still have strong feelings about this, about this gunfight.
But
so
the reason I ask you is so many people take what they see from the movie Tombstone, and
right.
That's kind of what I was asking. Like, that's not how that happened because in the movie it was this way.
Oh, yeah, no, I've never had, and that's one of our primary goals in this group is to present actual history and to refute some of the stuff that you see in the movies. I did last year. I worked on a thing for. I'd come across this website years ago, and the website was called "The Historical Inaccuracies of the Movie Tombstone," and it was just a bullet point list of everything that, or maybe not everything, but a lot of things that were wrong with the movie. And I went back several years later and couldn't find the website. I guess it had been taken down. So for my own use last year, I sat down and I started writing
your own list.
It was basically a list called The Historical Inaccuracies of the Movie Tombstone. And I probably watched, at that point in time, I'd probably seen Tombstone 100 times. Well, I probably went through it 50 more times, stopping, fast forward, and revert, rewind, and trying to get everything that I could. So it's basically a list that you can read along with the movie, and it tells you what you're seeing, and it goes scene by scene. It tells you what you're seeing, what's wrong with what you're seeing, and what actually happened.
Well, that should be a book.
And
that should be a pamphlet.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
This should be like a pamphlet.
It ended up being like, I don't know, it was like 14 or 15 pages. But again, it was really for my own use. I've shared it with a couple of close friends who are fans of the movie. And, I love the movie. I mean, it's a fantastic movie. Don't get me wrong. I absolutely love it.
Yep.
But I mean, there's a lot wrong with it, but they got a lot right, but there's a lot wrong with it as well. And it was I just thought it'd be fun to go through and pick out the stuff that was wrong. And if anybody that I knew that really liked the movie, I'd be like, hey, take a look at this and see what you think. And so I've done that a few times, but it was really just for my own purposes more than anything. So
as you're moving along in this reenactment group, you're bringing Western history to folks. This is why I wanted to interview him, because obviously authors and researchers write the books and we read them, for me, I'll never write a book, but my part of bringing Western history is interviewing amazing people and telling their stories. And then David comes along and is bringing Western history in a different light through a reenactor and in a reenactment group that's bringing it historically or as close as they can get to historically accurate.
Right.
Does the group talk amongst themselves on a year-to-year basis and say, we've been looking at like the Northfield raid, or we've been looking at this, we've been looking at that. Is it, are you looking at future reenactments of maybe researching and bringing into the list, or are you guys pretty much where you're at?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're of course familiar with Bob Bosbell, and he had a 3-volume series of classic gunfights, and he does these month in True West magazine, and they're great books. So there's several of us in the group that have these books, and we're kind of going through looking at stuff and hoping to pick out a couple more that we can write and research a little more in depth and present those at some point in time in the future. It's not right now. We're trying to focus on Griffin. We're trying to focus on growing the group on social media, both Instagram and Facebook. But yeah, there are plans to do just that. So
why don't you give them your email, which we just gave? It's acesand8shistory@gmail.com. Where else can we find you?
On Instagram, it's Aces and Eights History, and it's all spelled out one word, Aces and Eights History. And so those are our two primary platforms right now where we can post stuff. And
you have Facebook.
Yeah, we do have Facebook. On Facebook, it's Aces and Eights, but it's Aces spelled out in the little ampersand sign, the and sign, and then Eights. That's where you can find us on Facebook.
Okay. And do you take will you do private groups, private parties, and things like that?
Yeah, we've not done that so far, but we're looking to do as much as we possibly can. And that's certainly within the realm of possibility if anybody ever wanted us. And we do have cards that we give out at these shows. Our next little thing is going to be over in Soddy Daisy, Tennessee, at the Soddy Daisy Pioneer Festival. The group did it last year. It was kind of a last minute thing for me, and I didn't get to go, but I've made plans for it this year. So we're going to be there November 5th. I think it's the day. It's Saturday, November 5th. We'll be there working on getting a gunfight approved through the town. We haven't got word back on that yet, but we'll definitely be there. Soddy Daisy, Tennessee, I think is just a little bit north of Chattanooga. Like I said, I've not been over there, but it's about 3.5 hours from where I am. So, and we'll also be, we won't be performing, but we'll also be at the Booth Museum at the Southeastern Cowboy Festival and Symposium on October 22nd. We will be mingling and talking to people dressed out, in our period clothing, but we won't be performing. We'll just be, like I said, mingling and talking to folks. So that's in October.
Well, we're talking to David Guyton. You'll find David again at Aces and Eights History at gmail.com. You can find him at Aces and the you say it better than I do. The Hamperstand. I can't even say it. It's a tongue in cheek thing.
Yeah.
And you found that at Aces, Hamperstand, and Eights on Facebook. You can also find him, like I said, or like he said, on Instagram. But probably the best thing to do is email the group, and then they can help you if you can't find it, because Aces and Eights is such a popular name. Of course, I want to thank my friends over the Tombstone Epitaph, Arizona's longest running newspaper. Mark and Eric putting together a fantastic magazine or a newspaper, and the folks at the Wild West History Association at wildwesthistory.org. Again, you can find Wild West History Association on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. They're everywhere. And David is running the Instagram page for the Wild West History Association. So go see what he's doing there. You can find me on Facebook at Cochise County _travels, on Instagram by the same Cochise County _travels, and on YouTube, as well as iTunes, iHeartRadio app, Spotify, Stitcher. Make sure that you leave a rating and a review and hit that subscription bell or button. And because we're doing content every week, if you head over to the Facebook or the Instagram page, I'm posting content of my personal travels, and there's a lot of my personal travels through the American Southwest at Instagram and Facebook. So again, make sure you hit that subscribe or follow button, and I'd appreciate it. It does help with distribution. I think you got anything left, bud? We all good?
I'm great. I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And again, I want to thank him for his service, because not only did he serve our country in the military, but he also served as a law enforcement officer. When you combine the two of those, that's 31, 32, 33 years. I mean, it's just crazy. And that's a long time to serve your country and do it well. And for that, we really, we salute Dave, and we appreciate him a bunch, and we send him some love. And man, you just can't get any better than that. As always,
I appreciate it, Mike. I really do. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. And as always, I appreciate you guys. Safe travels, and we'll see you next